ISIS claims it was the one that planted the bombs in Kampala. And I said, this ISIS nearly overran the Middle East at some stage. And had it not been for the combined forces of the United Nations military forces, the permanent members, and NATO, Iraq, Syria, possibly Afghanistan will now be. Is that the kind of organization that can plant these sorts of little, improvised device in Kampala? No. So why do they claim it? Well, it's the same thing the NRA did in 1983 when Major General David Oyedejiok's helicopters got shot down. And, well, you lose nothing by claiming things you did not stage. Bad publicity helps terrorist groups. So basically, I just start off with the thought. When it happens, I start looking for all patterns and not necessarily begin to discuss, as most of you I'm going to do tonight, with the government position. That's the answer.
You post on your Twitter account that why didn't the ADF target the real enemy? Why didn't they bomb the buildings of their enemies in Mbarara?
There's so many farms, there's so many hotels.
But someone else says, how come Al-Qaeda didn't target George Bush's branches in Texas?
No, but they went for the Pentagon, went straight. In others, they had the way, they would have gone straight to the White House. If you go back from the 1960s, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, 1970, the PLO, the raid on Entebbe, the Mogadishu hijack, the Olympic Games massacre, 1972. If you look at this Arab Islamist terrorism for the last 50 years, those people don't joke. They go seriously. They don't look for some obscure place in Komamboga. They would be looking for places like the American embassy here. They would start off for the UN base in Entebbe. They would go head on for places like State House and whatnot.
But ADF is just an affiliate. So
but who says it's ADF? Who says it's ADF?
The relationship is at a nascent stage.
Who says it's ADF? That's the question. See, that's what I'm talking about, media. Who says ADF has never claimed these bombs? So why don't you just think out of the box?
Joseph, you posted something very interesting on your Facebook account about basically how we're entering a new phase, homegrown suicide bombers. I mean, it's just a number of things that you get a young man, indoctrinate a young man, radicalize a young person to be able to carry a suicide vest or whatever it is, something packed with ammonium nitrate and be able to explode it. But within the context that there are doubts about sometimes who exactly is carrying out these attacks, what do you make of basically what's happening currently?
First of all, I'll disagree with Timothy. It is ADF, and I'm not getting that from official sources. I'm getting that from outside sources of offshoots of ADF, really, and or at least people who were once in ADF and were supposed to have been, rehabilitated and brought back to society, and then fell on hard times here and went back to what they know best. And then the idea of ISIS not planting, ISIS in itself is totally in disarray right now. They would claim they would want to do anything, but the one thing they still have, I believe, and this was also said by Baruku, is that they have the ability to collect funds from different people across the world who might want terrorism in that aspect for all sorts of reasons, which ADF cannot. So now ADF would try to affiliate itself with ISIS for basic training on how to make, detonate, explosives, and also, especially, if they do what, if they create enough havoc, then they could get, in their thinking, they could get some funding from ISIS, which has the ability, which still has the ability, even if it was crushed by, Donald Trump and all that, it still has the ability there, and the fact that it survived for that long means that it had a lot of sympathizers in that region. The fact that they could take geographical space in that place means they still have some sympathizers somewhere in that place.
Actually, the UN panel of experts report, if you read it, specifically says Baluku is trying to reach out to ISIS purely for perhaps a selfish reason, that's financial gain.
Yes.
And there's been evidence that some of the trainers from Tanzania and elsewhere who have been to the jungles in the DR Congo have been training ADF in making IEDs and these kind of things.
That's the slight connection there might be to ISIS.
Exactly.
In terms of the money, I don't think has come yet, which I'm sure they really want, but the small expertise on how to build these explosives, and also the fact that, you know, if ISIS can sit there and take responsibility for something, it means for something, as he has said in Komamboga, it means that they also are desperate for some kind of attention, maybe even as much as ADF. So, but the thing they do is, if they can have, you know, if they can tell their funders, their previous funders, who I'm sure are still there, that we are still wreaking some havoc across the place, then it's possible that they could, you know, get some money, some funding, and then that's where ADF wants the affiliation from. They want the money. But that said, it's got to be said that, first of all, there was an offensive here by the Ugandan security forces that went and appeared to crush a lot of, you know, ADF that time, and people who were ganging up that time. And there was a lot of braggadocio even from, you know, politicians and people in power of how they had dismantled it. Now there are some fighters who left and went and did their thing somehow in Congo and went about their life. But the others who were brought to Kampala, actually, many of them went through the Amnesty Commission and got amnesty certificates.
Including Jamil Mukulu's son, who in 2013 got amnesty and returned.
Yeah.
Yasin.
Right. Now, the thing about that is, when they came here, they were given promises. They were demilitarized, I mean, disarmed. They were, you know, taken away from their from their terrorist habitat, but they were not resettled, and they were promised some things. And the reality is, and I've been hearing this from all sorts of sources, that there was a lot of disappointment in what they expected in regard to money and what didn't come. And actually, there was somebody who was shot in a very grisly manner, because apparently he's one of the people who had eaten their money. And now these are people who know they don't have a court. They don't have, the only way they know to solve issues is that
on the street.
Is the way they did that with that person. So now, number one, and then they have, the only training they have is to kill. So now, if you get them and give them amnesty and keep them roaming in the streets of Kampala without putting them somewhere, they are going to revert back to what they know, because it's all they know. And now, even if they're enemies of the country somewhere, and what you have ready people there who you just offer something, they have broken promises this side, and they have somebody who is offering them something to cause, you know, death and disruption, and I'm sure they would be game to go, because it's the only thing they actually are confident that they can do. So it's a whole, you know, process that we, because, you know, even the approach of the president, even in his speech yesterday, in one instance talking about let them all surrender, and, you know, come out, surrender. Then the other minute he's saying no bail, no what, no, you know, forgiving, no amnesty. Then he's you know,
counterproductive.
He's saying one thing and saying the other. So now, if he wants to go the amnesty way, then that's different. But if he wants to go the force way, but of course he always wants to use the force thing. But you see, you can crush people, but as long as they are not resettled, and as long as they stay out there and the only skill they know is how to kill, they will get back to what they know at some stage or the other.
Andrew, the president yesterday said basically what is happening today is a continuation of a series of attacks, assassination attempts on Katumba, Mala, and all these kind of things. And in the past, senior police officers, Andrew Felix Kawesi, senior prosecutor Kagezi, and the others. How serious is this threat to the security of this country?
Well, I think, Emma, please allow me by beginning by responding to some of the statements earlier made by Timothy. Timothy said, and correctly so, that a lot of journalists who have come to cover this story have covered it by listening to government. Well, I would like, and he said that is laser journalism. First of all, I need to take Timothy to the first year, first term, first lection journalism. Journalism teaches you that as a journalist, when you go to cover a story, especially a breaking story, remember these bombs were instantaneously happening and you have to cover them and then. It's important to rely on authoritative sources of information. And the government is an authoritative source of information. Listen to the police, report to the public, this is what the police are saying.
What happens when the police spins?
Please, Emma, you can hold your fire. I first explained to this ABC of journalism.
Okay.
Always listen to authoritative sources of information. That is a basic principle of journalism. The second, the story is breaking and evolving. So if a bomb takes place today, you cannot investigate and you cannot begin an investigation and establish all the facts there and then. The safety, therefore, is in official sources. If the IMF issues a statement, if Timothy Kaligera says Uganda's economy has grown like this, hardly would anybody listen to it and quote it. But if the Minister of Finance, the head of UBOS, the Central Bank of Uganda, or IMF or World Bank institutions that have such prestige of collecting and gathering data speak, then we always, as journalists, we must cover them first. So that is layer one. The second layer is where I would applaud him, theoretically, that if many times the government can lie, so our role as one of the values of journalism is to be skeptical. What really could be the truth? So journalists should go behind and investigate and establish facts beyond what authoritative sources are saying. Because authoritative sources, while we rely on them, they can also seek to mislead if government has a particular agenda that they want. Remember, there is a time government of Uganda accused Bobby Wine of having had guns in Arua, which were not there. So we can investigate and establish and find the facts. Here we can say government has said they found guns. Tomorrow we can say we have investigated and found XYZ. And therefore that's the role of investigation. Now let me come to him who accused those other journalists of being lazy. What were Timothy's investigations? What has he found about ADF? Or not found about it? What are his conclusions? What is the veracity of his evidence? What is the credibility of his sources? For all I know, Timothy Kaligera has not even gone to Congo where the ADF is. He has not talked to Congolese. He has not, because me, I can give an example. One thing, if in Uganda there is a journalist who has had very good contacts with ADF, it is me. I have hosted them on Andrew Mwenda Live, their commander. Timothy was there when I would be hosting them. I have met and talked to them in London. I used to have lunch with Jamil Mukulu here in Kampala, and the government of Uganda failed to get him. They had Abdallah Kabanda, who was the commander of the army. Government would not, they would move through Kampala here, and I would talk to them and I would interview them on my radio show by satellite phone. So I know ADF. Two, the governor of Ituri province, Bamanyisa, happens to be a Munyoro Mutoro, like my grandson Kabuleta here. Remember all of us here. Speak
for yourself.
So I can call him and he gives me information of what is happening inside Congo. He's a personal assistant. I have family and friends in Bunia, in Beni, in Butembo, in Mutuanga, all those areas of ADF. So at least I can speak authoritatively about the presence of ADF, and I still have sources within Kampala here and within Congo who relate to ADF. So ADF, Timothy, exists. If you say it does not exist, then you don't know. In fact, it shows me that you're doing exceptionally worse journalism than the journalists you're criticizing. ADF exists. So
did Timothy say
he started by saying
I said who says that?
He says that the Ugandan journalists are very lazy. They only relied on the government. He failed to tell us, if he does not rely on the government, whom did he rely on and what is the veracity of his evidence? He did not present it. But this should not stop this narrative. The second thing, there is a relationship, of course, between ISIS and ADF, between ISIS and many Islamic groups. This relationship is largely ideological. It may not be organizational, it may not be even financial, but there is a global movement by radical Islamists to spread something called an Islamic State, a caliphate. And it's an important ideological challenge to the existing world order, which is based on Westphalian principles. I don't want to go into the details, but sometime in 1648, European powers, after the 30 Years' War, European countries met in a region called Westphalia, in two towns whose names I cannot easily remember.
Munster and Osnabrück.
Munster and?
Osnabrück.
Osnabrück. And there, they developed certain principles of how a world order should be. The most important were respect for the territorial integrity of every country and respect for the sovereignty of every country, which means that how you govern yourself internally, you will not interfere in your domestic affairs, but internally you'll be tolerant of the different religious groups, because the wars were religious. Internal tolerance, the beginning, the birth of liberalism, and externally non-interference. The ISIS, this is a Western conception of the international order. But I think ISIS challenges that international order and believes the international order should be based on Islamic principles. ADF and so many other Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab may not have direct organizational linkages with ISIS. They may not have financial support from ISIS, but they share a common ideological platform, and that's why ISIS can stand and speak for them. It is like a communist movement taking place in Vietnam, another one taking place in Angola. They may not, but there is something called, say, the Communist International. So whatever happens, they take credit for it because they belong to the same ideological dish. Now, let me come to the specificity of these blasts. First of all, I do not think that these were suicide bombers. If you observe carefully those videos, okay, let me put it this way. I observed carefully these videos and they led me to two conclusions. One, that the people who detonated the bombs were not the people who were carrying them. If you look at the history of terrorism, there is a way a terrorist launches their bomb. They may stop, especially these Islamists, they may say Allahu Akbar and then blow something.
Is it cast in stone?
Well, it may not be cast in stone. I'm giving a series of things that they say when you watch a video, there are certain interpretations based on a particular precedence that guide you into analysis. Analysis is based on certain precedents. Precedent one, they never stopped, they never said anything. In fact, the detonators went off in motion. One was riding a bike, another one was walking. That is one, which I suspect somebody else may have been controlling the detonator, in which case there is even a likelihood that the person carrying the bomb may not even have known they were carrying a bomb, or if they knew, they thought they were supposed to deliver it somewhere and they had not yet reached there. That is one. And later I will tell you why I think it's like that. Two, targeting. Normally, the aim of a terrorist is, terrorism is a form of communication. That's another thing we should know. Terrorism is a form of communication. I want to dramatize what I'm doing in order to attract attention. So, the impact must be highly felt and the casualty rate must be high. Look at the guy at CPS, look at the border guy. Wherever they did their detonation, there is only one person in front, another one behind. With that boy at CPS, he could have walked up to the gate and even run all through to the lobby before the guy is trying to stop him. He had enough time before they cocked their guns to enter the lobby and blast from there. The security was so loose that until now that he could have had maximum impact, killed more policemen, and dramatized their cause better. And the fact that he was almost in the middle of the road and still moving in motion adds to my doubts about him having been the detonator. But the third thing, and which is very important, you should know that the government of Uganda has been in a war with the ADF for more than 25 years.
Sure.
And over these years, the government of Uganda has effectively penetrated ADF. Whenever it rises and begins operations in Kampala, the intelligence services penetrate this organization, so they know what is happening. So the guy carrying the detonator and the one carrying the bomb may have been separate, but they knew intelligence was on their head because, contrary to what Timothy claims to know, there are so many such bombs that have been stopped before they have been blasted. I was attending Lokechi's burial. Yes. They stopped a suicide bomber there with a vest. And every day, here is where I would criticize Ugandan journalism. The head of crime intelligence, Brigadier General Damulira, you can go and have an interview with him or perhaps find sources within crime intelligence. They will tell you how many bombs in the last 6 months or 4 months have been potential bombs have been diffused as a result of this penetration. It is also possible, by the way, and governments do this, and no one would know this better than Timothy Kalyegera, that the people in intelligence may have known, because within record time they produced the names of the suicide bombers, or the so-called, but they could have known what was going to happen and allowed it to happen, but happen in a manner that has limited the destructive capabilities.
How come they didn't produce their profiles?
They actually produced not only the names, but their profiles. You may not have followed it. They knew.
Where are the profiles?
This is why I'm saying, please, you go and interview crime intelligence, and you'll find they know so much about the people who are involved.
It's extremely simple.
But Emma, can I first finish so that you can ask your question? So the point I was making is that even the process, the fact that it was limited and they never reached either the gate of Parliament or the gate of Bowman House where Minister of Justice is or entered inside, it could also have been that the detonator is an infiltrant of the state into the organization. And sometimes, Timothy Kalyegera will know what happened in the Second World War. The British government had broken the German Enigma Accord, and they knew the Germans were coming to bomb the city of Coventry. But the British War Cabinet sat and said, if we defend this city, the Germans will know we have broken their code. They may develop a new code which we will not break. So in order to keep this, we will allow them to destroy the city and will do nothing to protect it in order to keep our secret. So Timothy knows these things better than anybody else, that intelligence can work. Those guys who were working, they could have been monitored by intelligence, and the fact that they had only 3 people to kill could also have been because they were controlled. You see,
in 1 minute, how big is the threat to the Ugandan government?
I personally think that ADF is a highly weakened and degraded terrorist organization. It is very strong inside Congo. It can intimidate and terrorize Congo. But the Uganda government, remember Museveni is a specialist in violence. He went to war, to the bush, fought a war using violence, and these means of what you'd call counter-revolutionary insurgency or terrorism are things where his mind and his skills and the skills of his government are best cultivated. And it will be very difficult for ADF to gain a foothold because of the ability of the Ugandan intelligence organizations to easily penetrate a terrorist group, penetrate terrorist cells, and within 3, 4, 5 months cripple the ability to perform any devastating act.
Professor, to bring you in, you keenly follow events in the region, and many of these types of violences, the bombings and these kind of things, have a transnational aspect. What exactly is happening in regard to the ADF? Is it because of the lawlessness we have in Eastern, in Ituri and all these provinces? And two, is there a nexus between the different, groups, Islamist groups? For instance, there's a theory that some of the Ugandans went and transplanted this insurgency in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, and there's been some kind of linkage between the Al-Shabaab and the ADF and some Tanzanian Islamists, the guy who hosted the ISIS flag in DR Congo. There's been a Kenyan in charge of, recruitment and all these kind of things, indoctrination and this. What's the linkage, Professor?
Thank you, Emma. I think the evidence is that actually these groups are working together. Recently, there's a report that has just been published by the International Center for the Study of Radicalization. This is about 2 weeks ago, King's College London. And they actually established that these groups are actually working together. So the aspect of, let's first talk about ADF. So what is ADF? When Jamil Mukulu was arrested and Baluk took over in 2016, Baluk has declared that actually ADF is no more. Because you remember ADF was comprised of 2 parts. The original ADF for Mukulu, but also there was the aspect of Nalu. Then and
then Rwenzuru was 3.
Yeah. So
Rwenzuru and ADF.
So the moderate part of ADF was the one of Nalu.
Yes.
So those people broke off.
Under Amon Bazir.
Yes. So they broke off. There's a guy called Sokanero.
Yes.
I think the son of the original founder of Nalu.
He's now part of the other.
Yes, he's part of the splinter group of ADF, which is now in South Kivu.
Yes, yes, true.
And then you have the original. So you have the new ADF, which is led by Musa Baluku. And Baluk, of course, I think it's also opportunism in the sense that when he declared that ADF is no more now, they are part of Islamic State of Central African Province. Because you remember it is DRC, Mozambique, Uganda, and Somalia. The center being, the coordinating center being Somalia. And if you talk to intelligence people, they will tell you that there is a connection. These groups now, in terms of knowledge transfer, this idea of constructing bombs, that never used to be the modus operandi of ADF. They didn't have the capacity before they declared their...
What do you mean capacity?
The capacity in terms of constructing these bombs.
But they made IEDs in the 90s.
Yes, the IEDs were there, but not as sophisticated as...
In fact, one of the IEDs that went off on a bus in 1999 killed 18 people.
Yes, but the point is that it was not as sophisticated.
July 7th.
So yes, it was not as sophisticated.
That's Al-Shabaab.
That's Al-Shabaab.
Yes.
But you remember also the other bits are these, that because if you, there is a group of Al-Shabaab which has declared its allegiance to ISIS.
Yes.
But the bulk of the group of Al-Shabaab is aligned with Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
And the two groups don't see eye to eye, Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Yes.
So the point is, in all this, what I'm saying is that there is a nexus between these groups, and increasingly, of course, when you mentioned Cabo Delgado,
yes,
the person who was leading that group, who was arrested by the Mozambican police, was a preacher from old Kampala.
Yes.
So clearly, right now, there is a nexus between these groups, and I think when you ask about the threat may not be as big in this country as it used to be, but in as long as these groups still exist. The last count in Eastern DRC, there were 130
yes,
foreign and local armed groups. Of course, ADF being part of the mix. So the threat still is there. I mean, it's an existential threat. In terms of penetration of course, it's possible that they can be infiltrated. But for them, they have to succeed only once. The government has to succeed all the time.
Yeah.
This is the difference.
What?
So recently I was reading the ISIS international, the organization which I used to work for, Institute for Security Studies, produced what we call an ISS Today. And in that ISS Today, someone was arguing that for the countries that are involved in these fights, especially Kenya with Somalia, Uganda with the Somalia, and then of course the countries now which are contributing, Rwanda in Mozambique, they really have to be on their toes because these groups increasingly they are getting sophisticated in terms of how they operate. They exchange information, they exchange training. So really we have to be on our toes. And that also can be explained in the sense that also we look at beyond the region. We also look at the Sahel. So the groups which are in the Sahel Islamic set of West African province, which is aligned to Boko Haram, and all the other groups which are in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in the countries where actually terrorism was not. But increasingly now we are seeing that the Sahel is one of the most unstable areas in this continent because of the insurgents who have been there now for the last coming to 10 years. So we really need to watch out.
Thank you, Professor. Timothy, you usually don't want to bow to the official dome narrative. And Andrew Mwenda, when he was, articulating these issues, talked about authoritative sources, and is quite right in this regard. If IMF is more likely going to give you better statistics about the economy than some guys in Chikubu, the WHO is likely going to, be more believable, plausible in regard to vaccines and all their dangers. But there's also a danger in that there are very specific issues. For instance, I had one of the spokespersons of one of the security institutions say, we killed Sheikh, is called Chilevo, I think the guy who was recently executed, and there's been a contest in regard to the circumstances that led to his shooting. She said that, we found out from one of the people we arrested who told us that he was part of us. Now, if you're going to kill or shoot dead a sheikh on the basis of this kind of hearsay, and you don't interrogate and subject evidence to the basic rules of evidence, then it becomes problematic when you listen to the so-called authoritative voice and you go with that. Perhaps that's where there's doubt. And Timothy, why do you continuously reject the official dome position?
Well, because of the biggest story of all, the Idi Amin story. When I investigated that story, I said, if this can be so different from, the facts are different from what assumption, what else don't we know? It's like new archaeological findings say, by the way, it wasn't Judas who betrayed Jesus in the Bible as we thought for 2,000 years. It actually was Matthew, that tax collector who loved money and all this, but they framed Judas, and a whole new discovery. It's like, for 2,000 years, it was Judas Iscariot. What else don't we know? April 1995, when there was this tension between Uganda and Khartoum, and I don't know if you're old enough to know the time, but it was there in the news when the International Security Organization said there were arms in the Sudanese embassy at, I think, Nakasero. Yes, and surround and all, go there and check, and they're not there. Sometimes these people do things the wrong way. The other, just not long ago, I think there was an outcry when they said the World Bank apparently had been overstating China's economic growth. And then, of course, this whole question of, you mentioned WHO, even this COVID-19, just that bit where they kind of gave China a pass in terms of the origin of that virus.
Exactly.
And then now it seems to be, in other words, the reason why this new digital economy, the Googles, Facebooks, Amazons, have completely upset the old world order is that there was that conventional wisdom around, yes, the World Bank, IMF, and all this, the media, advertising, the conventional way. Now a whole new economy based on a whole new logic and much more efficient logic has emerged. So sometimes, yes, in a basic sense, the police by default, the government spokesman, is a starting point, or this is a point you can't discard. But then my opinion is that it's just one of those cases, just like what happened in 1977, when the government of Uganda officially, police, press conference was Janet Loom had died in a car accident with the two ministers of Fumbi and Oriema. That was the official government statement. Next day, had it been NTV then or the Daily Monitor, would have been.
So what was it?
Long story. But anyway, the point I'm just trying to say is that
I've read CIA declassified files, and it seems to suggest that Idi Amin killed Benedicto Chiwanuka.
But this is what I'm trying to say.
And you often...
That's what I'm saying. When I hear these things, that's
what's the basis of your...
When I get to hear these things, some which I will not discuss in this, when I get to hear these things, those little things, that's when I saw even the CIA follows generic story. There's some CIA information during in the 79, the Lule Binaisa period, when these medical doctors were being gunned down, that wave of murders of prominent Ugandans. The American embassy in those declassified cables, they spoke to, I think, Gracie Vingira and several people, and the picture that emerges is kind of that generic thing. It has made me start thinking, no wonder the CIA gets wrong estimates of people like, let's say, the strength of Taliban and so on. So
Definitely.
You really, really must be skeptical. You really must think for yourself. You must be willing to entertain everything from the most plausible and official sources to the most outrageous of conspiracy theories if you're to understand this world. You've seen all these books that come out much later, and it's like, okay, in the Falklands War, actually what had happened was the British had secretly been in touch with some unexpected source, Belgian intelligence to work out a peace treaty. Then it's like, okay, what don't we know? Then there are things, that come to your mind.
Egyptian spy.
Exactly.
It's the guy who died in London.
London or Damascus?
London, the guy who fell off a flat.
Yes, exactly. Then even this question, the Panam, the Lockerbie bombings, and this Libyan intelligence officer insists to his death, he says, people, that was not us. Wait for a book 10 years from now that says, actually, it was the other way around. So because of all this staggered history, I'm not saying you must always ignore this, but start off, listen to everything. When these incidents take place, tune into the local...
So did Apollo 11 land on the moon?
That did land on the moon.
Because there have been a lot of people.
Exactly. Sure. So if a person comes to such an outrageous view, have it in the intro, don't dismiss it outright, and then later, because there was a Discovery Channel documentary 2 months ago where there's a man who explained that how they actually staged alternative. They said, no, what if, by the way, we could do like an alternative thing that simulates this landing. So he confesses, he's now I think in his 80s, and says, actually we created this alternative thing that questioned, how come the flag wasn't blowing, but he said the fact is it did land on the moon. It's just that we created this popular thing that then of course part of conspiracy theories. In us, anything is just possible.
9/11 was an internal
yes.
job. But
would you imagine if the Iran-Contra scandal hadn't leaked, of America secretly selling arms to Iran
Nicaragua
to raise money for the Contra railroad? If those things hadn't leaked, or many of these Washington Post, Bob Woodward stories hadn't come out, what would we know about world history?
Joseph, well, we read in the media that the British intelligence, a few days before the attacks, warned us, I think MI6 or whatever it was. What do you make of what was reported? We don't know till to date what exactly they warned us about, and the circumstances. No one is asking the question. What do you think of that?
Well, the first thing I feel, first of all, to go out with what Kalejira is saying here, usually when there is one dominant narrative and nobody is departing from it, that's when I start questioning it. That's when I start saying, how come? There has to be an alternative in every... Somebody has to think something different. Now, when everybody seems to be unanimously agreeing something, which, unless like it is so obvious, then I start questioning myself and so on. For instance, like just this week, there was a young teenager, Kyle Rittenhouse, who had been sentenced by everybody, the whole world, Joe Biden, the media, everything. He killed Black Lives Matter protesters. He shot them in cold blood and so on. And I mean, everybody had ruled him guilty until they went to court, until the videos came out, until everybody learned he did not kill a single black person. All the people he killed were white. Okay? Until people learned that actually the man's life was in danger and he was actually in self-defense. Until the court learned that the people he killed, one of them is a known child molester who has been molesting children between 9 and 11 years. So the thing is, usually there is something. So now when the evidence actually came to court, you know, he was acquitted. Then everybody looks back and say, all the media, the entirety of the media was wrong. And I'm talking about 100% wrong, false narrative. So anyhow, that said, in regard to this situation, I've always felt that in as much as there is ideology and all that and so on, the reality is that usually a lot of these criminal activities take root in a place where there are grievances. First of all, they have to be serious grievances. Okay, you have to find a grievance. Even I mean, before the Arab Spring, there are so many people in Europe who didn't like Gaddafi, but they had no grievance to hold on to bring him down. Now, when there was a grievance that came up, they jump on that and use it to bring him down. Now, of course, the ADF, there are grievances right there. There are the Renzururu who have their issues, and there are, you know, some of these others who sat here and actually decided to go and start some Islamic thing and so on. But also there has to be economic conditions to precipitate that. Because at the heart of almost all crime is poverty. And that's the reality. It's poverty. For instance now, I was reading a report from South Africa where the number of rapes have gone up, have skyrocketed. And all that in the time when they were on...
Joseph, that's partly true, but not entirely true.
No, I'm just...
Abdul Muttalib, the Nigerian guy who tried to bomb the plane over Detroit, was from one of the wealthiest Nigerian families.
No, I know. There will always be those. Even like, even the people, even the British boys who left their middle class life and went to an Islamic state. But they are looking for some ideology. But the truth is, for you to get people and actually know, because security is saying they actually caught people who had been taken out of Kampala. Some of them had been tricked to be taken, and they were told they are going to give them jobs, and then they were taken. Then they get there, then they actually realize that they are being recruited into some kind of outfit for which they had no consent whatsoever, and now it's too late for them to leave. That's what they are saying. That's what security is saying, and of course you take that with a pinch of salt. But the reality is that, is there anything in this Kampala right now that you cannot recruit people for? In these current economic conditions, if I wanted to recruit people to do anything, and I mean anything, okay, there was an NGO recruiting girls to go and sleep with the dogs. And actually the girls went there willingly. And they knew what they were going to do. And they went there willingly. So the economic conditions, now what I was telling you here is, and the grievances, what I was telling you here is that murders in South Africa, because of lockdown conditions and all that, up 41% in some provinces. The number of rapes, the number of, of crime reports and so on, everything goes up when there is poverty, because there is desperation. And now when there is desperation, there is a lot more people who have nothing to lose. And that's a very bad place to be in. So in regard to this, and even some of these people I'm talking about, which is a very serious thing by the way, because we've had scenarios, now a true scenario which happened, where people were sent into ADF, and they were sent as informers. Now they get there, and everybody knows they're informers. They get there and they infiltrate the ADF. And actually, the information they give is good to capture some real terrorists. But now when these people came out, and then they started demanding for the money they were promised, actually they were ganged up with the terrorists all together and sent to prison, and they have been there and they have been writing letters saying who actually informers, who are sent as informers. Until the point when you talk money, everything is going okay. And now you see, what does that know? You see the ripple effect from all that. First of all, who is going to go there as an informer? Knowing that, it's a dangerous thing. You're joining people who are killers, and you're pretending to be one of them. If they find you out, there's only one solution. One thing only, death. But you go and risk your life because there's something has been promised to you. Then it does not happen. And not only does it happen, they actually lock you up, yet you are not a terrorist. You are helping bring down terrorists. So there is and then all these people here, I'm telling you, there are some people here who came here and got amnesty. And they have been roaming around, and they have bad training. And until you get them something else to do. Okay? And I was saying that, you know, when Jesus died and the disciples are confused, what next? They say, let's go back fishing, because that's what they know to do, because they were fishermen before that. So somehow, somebody, unless you mobilize him to do something else, you go back fishing. And this is, and that's where the threat is for me. I'll answer the question you asked him. How big a threat is it? It might be a bigger threat than we are giving it credit.
Thank you, Mr. Kabuleta. You're a presidential candidate, and perhaps it is one of those things you'll address in your economic blueprint. We're going to take a commercial break. We're discussing the issue of regional security and the idea of threat.
The most important thing is to even teach the electorate about the issues concerning election, because anybody who has been in an election knows that the electorate lacks any form of civic knowledge and civic direction. What are the issues that we are voting for, rather than the personalities? Now they vote personalities. Now we want to move a bit out of that, okay, because we've had personality politics for 35 going to 36 years, and the cult of personality and so on. But now I see even a lot of the people who are thinking about, you know, a change of government, you see it's the same personality thing that mentality that they are pushing. Now we want to take civic education to those people and say these are the issues that you should be voting for. The Muntua ones as your fellow people. Now these are the issues you should be voting about. Now when somebody comes to you, these are the things you should task him to tell you how he is going to handle them or she is going to handle them. And now those people start understanding what is at stake. And because some of them, you know, people are seated in regions which are very resource rich, and they have no idea, and as a result they have put on, and of course it has been deliberate by this government to make sure they have no idea. So they are moving around with their heads low, and they have nothing to fight for. They don't feel like fighting for anybody. Now we are saying we do not want you to fight for anybody. Fight for yourself. Fight for the resources that are in your place, where you are born or where you stay, and that is a good enough reason for you to awaken. The regions in this country have resources that are exclusive to those regions, and we want the people in those regions to know what resources they are, and we want to awaken them, number one, to the issues they should vote about in future, number two, to the fact that they're entitled to having a slice of those resources, because there is a lot of places where a lot is being taken out, but the people from where it is taken have not benefited a penny, and they are living in abject poverty. Now because they are being told somehow, your father, using my metaphor, your father was poor, you know, but now I want to tell them, no, there is something actually to fight for. Why are these people, if you are in Bukedi or in Tororo or those places, Busia and so on, Bukedi really among our regions, and you hear that people are mining 3,000 kilos of gold every day. Every day. That's 3 tons.
There's a lot of child labor in the mines there as well.
Now, the people who are doing the mining are given very little money. The people of the region, even the districts and so on, get hardly anything. Now, all that money is being taken out. And I was actually reading a story, and I was bemused because you hear that $100 million invested by a Chinese company. Then you say that sounds good, until you hear that actually they're taking out 3,000 kilos of gold.
The capital flight is
now 3,000 kilos of gold. I'll tell you, a kilo of gold on the market should be about $55,000. So a ton is about $55 million. I mean, about thereabout. So imagine 3 tons. So those people are getting their investment in a matter of days, so to speak. Even if you factored in the labor and all
operations and logistics and all.
And then they are saying they are giving taxes of 30 billion shillings to the government. 30 billion, that's like 10 million, and that's less than a kilo of gold. If we are actually going to end this urban terrorism, there has to be a clear program to do it, because there's been a lot of people who have been, their only training is terrorism. So unless they get something else to do, because you see, even as somebody who reads the Bible, when Jesus comes and takes his disciples away from fishing for 3 years, when he dies, and they don't...
Discussing the question of regional security and the idea of threat. Andrew Mwenda, given the recent wave of insecurity, if I were to use a hypothesis, if this was in Kenya, Raila Odinga, Uhuru Kenyatta and the others, even at the time they disagreed or whoever it is, they collectively came together and sounded a clarion call against acts of terror, Westgate Mall. We seem to be divided as a country. Why is this?
That's a very difficult one to tell. I have never understood. I think that either there is a way the opposition in Uganda gains support and is seen by its admirers, or the way in which President Yoweri Museveni has structured his politics and how he relates to the opposition that shapes the way they act. Because the opposition in Uganda are afraid that if they are seen to agree with him on anything, then it means he has bribed them. And many leaders of the opposition could open an olive branch to Museveni, but their supporters would walk away from them. So I think that Museveni has a profile of a person who has this kind of ability to co-opt, bribe, or blackmail, whatever it is trick that he uses, his opponents to his side. So those who don't like him want to see their leaders as not dealing with him, which of course in itself undermines the democratic process, because you see, democracy is built on negotiation and compromise. And I don't think you can secure political reform through a decisive victory, whether political, military, or otherwise, by one side. Ultimately, the democratic process is built through fits and starts over a long period of time, where the contending parties have to meet and negotiate. If you begin negotiating, then there must be something you must give for you to take something. So you must maybe compromise on some of your principles, some of your agenda, but I get the sense that the most enthusiastic supporters of the opposition see any compromise as surrender, any engagement as being sellout. They believe, they don't agree that you can disagree with Museveni without being disagreeable. So you must be very virulent in your attack on him. They believe, they think that working with Museveni means working for him. So if you try to do anything with him, then you are working for him. He has co-opted you and bribed you. And I think therefore the politics, I don't know how the two have fed each other. Remember that politics of this nature is a two-way process. There must be a series of activities and moves Museveni has made that has created that kind of suspicion in the public. And now that suspicion has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, which has meant that there cannot be any form of dialogue and interface between the government and the opposition, which actually is very bad for democracy in Uganda. Is very bad for democracy in Uganda. So that is one. But I wanted to come to the issue of terrorism, what we need to take away from it. You see, terrorism at its roots is a kind of a political ideology, let me put it this way, is a political strategy that does not seek to succeed on the basis of what it does. It seeks to provoke the state to act in a particular way. It is not what the terrorist does, but how the government responds that shapes the fortunes of the terrorist. For example, in this case, let us create, do these attacks. The government of Uganda will respond by victimizing Muslims, isolating them, killing them, ransacking mosques and all this.
And that will make it easier for us to attract more.
It is that may bring support and sympathy and convert so many Muslims into our side. Then we can launch either a guerrilla war or a military struggle on the basis of these kinds of provocation. That is the essence of terrorism. So if you're government of Uganda, what you need to think about is, by the way, if government does not react as the terrorist wants, the government wins, the terrorist loses. And therefore, that is the challenge the government of Uganda is facing. Of course, there are two major weaknesses, I think, with ADF. You see, ADF is seeking to recruit people on an ideological, religious basis who are from one community called Muslims. But Muslims constitute 12 to 14% of Uganda's population. So that limits its appeal as if it wants to build a mass movement. Two, it has positioned itself to be allied with ISIS, an organization with a very bad reputation in Uganda, even among Ugandan Muslims, except among a small fringe group of Muslims. So that itself is likely to limit its appeal. So at the very best, it can maximize its nuisance value, but it cannot become what I would call an existential threat to the power of the state. I don't even think it can become a strategic threat. At best, it can be a tactical threat. An annoyance, a kind of an annoyance and inconvenience, but a nuisance, but it cannot become a strategic threat. And remember that it's also contending against a government led by some by people who are so experienced in these things as well. Museveni is not an easy nut to crack. I am very confident that he's likely to go and engage different segments of the Muslim community, whether through ambassadorial appointments, ministerial appointments, and whatever it is, and win a large section of them and isolate the extremists. So, and I think that should also help us understand why it has to dress itself in ISIS garb, because then it gives, what ISIS does, it gives it some international reach. And therefore it positions itself no longer as just a mere Ugandan force trying to change a domestic situation. It's part of a global movement that is trying to restructure the global order. Now, of course, that gives it bragging rights, but it does not constitute a strategic or existential threat to the power in Uganda.
Professor, you've been reading and studying a lot of these reports, crisis group, the UN panel experts. What if the ADF and the other groups become fairly organized and they are able to build the capacity that, for instance, the affiliates of Al-Qaeda had in the late 1990s, and build, in quotes, a dirty bomb using TNT or C4, these kind of things? What kind of threat then do they pose if they get to that organizational capability?
No, I mean, look, for me, my fear in all this is that we are now talking about suicide bombers. I mean, this is something which is a phenomenon which is improvised, people-born improvised explosive devices, but these are groups which are capable, for example, now graduating into vehicles. Supposing you are to pack those explosives into a vehicle. We saw what happened in Oklahoma in 1995. This is where it becomes
in Nairobi.
Yes, this is where it becomes a little bit, and so the more they become sophisticated, the more they will be able to acquire these capacities. And as I said, these are groups which now are working together. So you have trainers from Al-Shabaab training, ADF, people from ADF going to Mozambique, people from, Boko Haram dealing with the Al-Shabaab. So it's possible. But that also means that the power, the capacity of the state has to be built. My first reaction when I heard this on last Tuesday was that I think the government has to invest in intelligence. These are things which you need to nip in the bud. Otherwise, if there is no intelligence, I can tell you it's going to be very, very difficult. And that also would mean that you have to improve the relations between the population. The civil-military relations have to improve, so that the people can deal with but the reputation of some of these institutions in this country, instead of people going to the police, the people run away from the police. You see, so how are you going to get intelligence? So it becomes very problematic. But there has to be a deliberate effort to invest in intelligence.
But just 1 second, I want to correct my friend. In fact, I think Uganda has very good intelligence on these terrorists. As I have explained to you before, there are so many terrorist attacks that have been thwarted in the last 3-4 months, and I'm even inclined to believe that these that happened, their casualty rate was so low, just 3 people, and it could be because intelligence was either on their heels and they had to blow them quickly before they could get to their actual targets, or that the intelligence managed them the conventional way where it knew there was going to be a limited damage. Because I asked myself, if I wanted to dramatize my cause as a terrorist with that bomb, why wouldn't I have gone to some place where I could achieve 80% casualty rate?
No, but Andrew, that may well be the case. That may be well the case. But my point here is this: that we need to do more.
So let me tell you something I know about the government of Uganda too.
I think, Andrew, also what you say is largely based on assumption, because first and foremost, you're comparing perhaps an amateur, someone whose experience and training is not as the guys in the Middle East who is doing this for the first time who is going to come under a lot of nerves and so he may not.
It could have even been a trial run.
Exactly.
By the way, I should tell you,
So-
Emmanuel, you are very wrong. In fact, ADF is 25 years old.
That's true.
It has had a lot of experience in
But
these
these are
things.
young people who are
Long
involved
before
in this.
ISIS was born,
That's true.
ISIS was throwing bombs in Uganda. So you cannot say they are ISIS are amateurs.
The person the young people who participated in this were not as old as the ADF is. I mean, in terms of experience.
But they
That's
must
what I
have
mean.
gone through thorough training. Remember
Perhaps.
that ADF has a safe haven in Congo where it is free to roam, train, organize as it wishes. But the other point,
I believe definitely.
Yes, but
The
the
issue I have with your thing, Andrew, is
Yes.
first of all, there have been very few convictions. Now, if we have the evidence, if we have the intelligence, and we have, all that leading up to the time, then we should have more convictions in court.
But,
First of all. Secondly, there's been a lot of people who are being released from torture cells, having not been charged, and having gone through a lot of trauma, and eventually found to be innocent.
Can I tell you something, Kabuleta? I'm surprised that you're surprised. Because if you follow the history of terrorism across the world, how many people the United States arrested in Guantanamo Bay? How many were tried and convicted? Anyway, let me tell you about if the game is intelligence, and I'm collecting, I have infiltrated you, and now I know what happened inside you, and I have arrested people, others. The evidence that may be needed to secure a conviction may lead to the revelation of the assets that the government is using. You may find even the deputy commander of ADF. Hold a second, hold your breath.
Yes, yes.
You may find the deputy commander of ADF is the CMI infiltrant or the field commander, whatever it is. One of the problems of prosecuting terrorism is to fight terrorism, you must infiltrate the cells. If you infiltrate the cells, it means if you are going to prosecute and produce evidence, you may expose your assets inside the organization. And the MI6,
That's
CIA,
partly true.
they
That's
face
you've
that
had
challenge.
people in Guantanamo Bay, but Sheikh Khalid Muhammad, the mastermind of 9/11, was prosecuted.
Sure.
Ramzi
Successful.
Yusuf, the guy
Successful,
who
by the
tried to
way.
bomb Manhattan, the Twin Towers in '93. I mean, he had a great skill, and he was very prolific in making bombs. He's in jail and he was prosecuted. So it's
So
not
for a
entirely-
country,
As well as so many
for a
ISIS
country that
people,
has arrested more than 20,000 terrorists, and you got 2 convictions or 3 or even 5,
No, these
I'll
are
tell
the
you that does not
masterminds.
show. Yes, but I could tell
I
you
want you to quote a few
99%
here
of the
in
people,
Uganda.
99% of the terrorists who have been arrested since 9/11 over the last 20 years, and they could be in hundreds of thousands, by the way, have never been convicted. In fact, the vast majority of those people in Guantanamo Bay were released without even a trial. One of the reasons the United States refused to take them from Guantanamo Bay to mainland America for trial, why was it? They knew they could never succeed in prosecution, given the circumstances. So I don't get surprised that the government of Uganda has never secured a conviction, although I think they secured a conviction of some terrorists, which was overturned by the Court of Appeal, I think of the Kamogas, I think 2 or 3. But we can go and find out. But it does not surprise me. It doesn't surprise me.
To bring in Timothy, you seem to suggest that there's a regional angle to this thing, and I think I've seen some kind of writing by a student at Makerere Institute for Social Research, whose dissertation was on the ADF, that ADF has become some kind of political weapon or kind of convenient excuse, that whenever there are flare-ups, whenever there's violence, it's the quick fix, everything ADF. What perhaps could this be a spillover from the Congo? Uganda wants to build roads in the Congo and do a couple of things.
Let's pick up on that question, the roads. June, is it last year or this year? When Uganda and Congo signed this agreement to build a road connects Uganda to Congo, I think that circumvents Rwanda, something like that. And I don't know if it's supposed to be one, but essentially, Rwanda, that's already double landlocked with Uganda between it and Kenya and the coast, is now going to see itself being circumvented. And you might remember from a reading, there was some kind of tension in the region. Obviously, beginning with this closure of the border between Uganda and Rwanda, for the last, it's coming 3 years now, since 2019. So that was the original narrative. You can go check on the internet. The general view was this road being built by Uganda in association with Congo is going to isolate Rwanda, and Rwanda is not amused. Not so? That's what we all knew at the time. So last night, there goes the president on TV. And it says, now look at these ADF people. In fact, they're not even happy with this road. they feel, they're not, what kind of people are those, not happy that the road is there. And they target the Minister of Works, General Katumba Wamala. Why? Because they, think that road, and it's like, I started thinking,
They're speaking in tongues.
what? And then there comes Thedin Sidashonga, the former ambassador to the US, who says ADF is supported by A and B. And then something is going on. And the way he portrays it, if you know the ADF, at least the way it's perceived, ADF is really, it should have stated by now, its petty goal is really just, election was really in 96, we're angry with Museveni. It's really from that old Kampala, the Muslim police of Uganda. But the way he was speaking last night, he was almost speaking about an ADF that's kind of like almost like a nation state, and that's strategically trying to hamper Uganda's advances. And I kind of felt Museveni just did not want to mention a certain country, but decided for the time being to use the word ADF, and goes on and laughs in the middle of this conversation, throws in this word, like when I'm saying it's you, Emma, you're stupid, but since I can't say Emma, I say you, Scooby-Doo, and I call Scooby-Doo the fool, everybody knows who I mean. So you could see he relished this sense, and I said, there is something in this story that just, especially when you mention the road, the ADF has never the problem. The ADF would gain a lot if that road was done for their own logistical point of view. It's the ADF should, if its immediate complaint should be this recent election that was rigged or the ones before, but ADF and having a problem with Uganda road, Congo, I know somebody else was a bigger problem with that road, Congo, than ADF. That, you see what I mean? That's what I said. You begin to go. So I went and checked through all these things, in, the timeline, the searches of and behold, there's this quiet thing of, you see some Congolese. I don't know. It's common knowledge in anyway. Rwanda is supporting ADF and what. It's like, hey, some obscure Congolese like argue among themselves and all this and such. And so last night I listened, I said, you see what I mean? By going beyond this official... No, I'm not suggesting anything.
Yeah.
But I'm just
you are suggesting something.
Sorry, I hope I'm not on air. But
you are suggesting something.
Are you on air?
Oh, sure.
Mr. Kabuleta, to bring you in, yes, terrorism has...
there's that unfinished... whereas there's this ADF, there is something hanging over two neighboring countries for the last 3 years. There's intelligence, Uganda has admitted, has infiltrated them. It's the more immediate tension and...
so terrorism sometimes has two faces, and when you read Mahmoud Mamdan's book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, he has very quite interesting illustrations. When Russia was in Afghanistan and the US had this Nebraska project, they sent in books, mathematics books into Afghanistan to calculate the speed to calculate speed, and using the illustration of the AK-47, how long does the Mujahideen bullet take, calculate speed, basing on that to take out a Russian fighter. And you recently said that on radio, I think, the other day, that the current regime, when they were in the bush, there was the Anti-Terrorism Act, I think, wasn't in place then. They were more or less terrorists. You've aspired to be a president of this country. How would you deal with the problem of ADF and the regional insecurity?
First of all, before I answer that, the issue of wanting to, first of all, our intelligence community and ganging everybody they disagree with the current dispute the country is facing. I know about that. There was a time when everybody was somehow associated with Rwanda, and there was all these people who were arrested for being associated with Rwanda. I actually was happened to be one of them. Everybody knows I was arrested for writing something against Muhoozi. It was very clear. It was clear. That's why I was arrested. And it was clear he's the one who ordered for my arrest. But when I get there, they start questioning me as if Rwanda is sponsoring you. And then they say, you're selling your country. Why are you selling your country? Then they start questioning me and trying to push me to Rwanda, a country I've never even visited. By the way, but coincidentally, I've never even visited. But you see, they are trying to push you there because to try to justify. Then I saw another story that came out which even had it was somewhere on social media which even had the amount of money they had supposedly given me. And I'm saying, look at this,
So
something built out of totally nothing. Now the thing is, I also know that what that student wrote and said that ADF can be a convenient excuse for a number of things, by the way. It can be an excuse for Ugandan forces to continue going into Congo and our gold exports to continue staying up there, yet we know we do not produce all that gold here. So maybe they were supposed to be there and not too big, so that every time we can go into Congo to fight ADF and also perhaps some other things. But they were not supposed to come into Kampala to start bombing people. So maybe they were, they are like, the side chick who came home and started knocking at the main door or something like that. So maybe they're supposed to be there so that every time president is talking to Shekedi, want to go into, to come into Congo to fight ADF, we know it's not just going to stop there. So there are a number of things which are there. But answering your question, how would I deal? First of all, there has to be all the grievances, which usually, because of course you can't say that we sort this is going to be sorted permanently. But I know for sure that when there is a real democracy, I know when there is a method by which grievances are being handled, or at least if, I'll give you an example, I was in Tanzania and there were a lot of elite people who hated Magufuli, a lot of business people who hated Magufuli, but they were sitting out the 10 years. They said, we'll wait it out, because after 10 years, he's going to go anywhere. But in Uganda, what do you sit out? You don't know. I mean, it's all based on perhaps, I don't know, some vagaries or something. So the point is, there are certain conditions which are birthed by political scenarios. Number one, political and economic scenarios. And a lot of terrorism is birthed in that sort of thing. Now, when, you remember the Abrahamic, you probably know about it, Abrahamic Accords. Now, when Donald Trump said that, why have all these countries refused to acknowledge Israel as a country? It's been there 70 years, and it's growing. And then Arab countries, which are much smaller, say, no, we don't recognize. Your lack of recognition is not changing anything. They are there. So he sits and realizes that this can be solved with money. So he sits with all of them. Palestine is screaming, don't go there, but Donald Trump calls so many countries, and they sit and he says, we have $50 billion, we can give you, we do business, you have business, Israel can do a lot of business. Instead of fighting useless wars, why don't we just start doing business and make money? And then suddenly the next thing you know, UAE is signing, and Bahrain signed. If he had been there, Sudan was next, Tunisia was next, Morocco was next.
Sudan signed and Morocco signed.
So now, why is that? Because he addressed the core issue. The core issue is that there is a country in the midst of you, which is whose prosperity matches Western Europe, and yet you're surrounded by poverty. So why don't we first deal with the poverty situation? Because I know this, things like tribalism and all those arise out of, at the heart of it all is because when you start doing a business, now I was recently in Bukedi, and there's all this issue between the Bateso and the dollar and all that. I don't know, this is poverty, because when you start doing serious business and you're linking up, the tribe does not matter. If you're a wholesaler, you don't care about, because the minute your pockets start growing bigger, there are certain things that cease to matter completely. So I'll tell you that, first of all, I can't say for sure that it wouldn't be there, but I can tell you that the conflict resolution would be there to avoid scenarios where people feel they have to go and start blowing up people to die for them to make a point. And then the democracy would be there so that people feel, regardless of how hard pressed they are, they can wait out a term, 5 years, and then go and express their disapproval in a ballot which will be respected, or so many other things that can be changed to kill all the scenario that is at the bedrock of all kinds of terrorism.
Great. Andrew, do you agree with the views of the two gentlemen that perhaps ADF is a red herring, but the real problem are the fissures within the Great Lakes?
No, I don't. You see, the government of Rwanda accuses the government of Uganda of supporting its enemies and seeking to topple it. If you're a government of Rwanda, what would you do? Maybe in retaliation, you also support the enemies of the government of Uganda.
Double jeopardy.
Yes, so I would not be surprised if the government of Rwanda had links with ADF, because I don't think they would sit, if they believe government of Uganda is planning regime change in Kigali, I don't think they would sit idly. But my own view is that ADF is primarily a Ugandan problem. not a regional problem, and regional powers may pick an interest in it. They may exploit our internal incoherences to their advantage, not because they're the cause.
Yeah,
so Uganda can do two things. It is up to the government of Uganda to improve her diplomatic relationship with the government of Rwanda, in which case reduce the incentive of them to think they should support our enemies. And I also do not think that the government of Rwanda can support the kind of terrorism of ADF. They would rather run away from it, because you see right now the United States government is going to get involved, the British are going to get involved, and the French, in this kind of terrorism that you see. I think this is a very good thing from Museveni, because he has been under a lot of pressure from them on issues of democratization.
Actually, the US government has now designated ADF as an affiliate of ISIS.
You see, so he has been under a lot of pressure on democratization. Then there are these bombs, they take place. Then the Americans, the British, and the French, now, in order to fight this global terror, focus shifts to align with Museveni to fight the terror and forget the democratic agenda. I don't see how there Museveni loses. And if you are Rwanda, you would be very careful not to position yourself as someone siding with this kind of organization. So even
but if it's to his advantage, let me just ask, if it's to such a great advantage of his, what would you say about somebody who says, well, maybe
he's the one planning it?
No. I mean, because I've heard people saying that. Because, I mean, we always look for motive.
How come ADF was
well, the only problem is that, in fact, it is the United States government and the British government which called on the Uganda government to say, we have sufficient intel that you're going to be victims of attack, and this information is coming from Congo. So, in other words, whether it is him who planned it from Congo, at least he has been successful, he has led them to successfully believe that it is ADF inside Congo. In any case, by the way, the government of Congo has invited the government of Uganda to send troops to Congo to fight ADF. So ADF is real and exists and is a menace inside Congo, and it is the plan, Uganda's deployments in Congo, that are forcing them to come and attack here, which is also one of the strategies you can employ. If you're going to attack me in Congo, I had better, come and cause for you trouble in Kampala. But there are two things I wanted to raise. One, you are referring to Kabuleta, and I think Lukwago was saying Museveni was a terrorist in the bush. I think that it's important for the public in Uganda to know the difference between a terrorist and a guerrilla. A terrorist and a guerrilla can do the same things, but their motivations will be different. Let me give you a simple example. There is a railway line from Kampala to Kasese.
It's not there.
Is that who said that?
Let me assume, I'm giving you an example. There is a railway going to Kasese. Now, the government of Uganda is facing a heavy insurgency in Kasese and Fort Portal. And it uses the railway to transport its troops, to reinforce its troops in Kasese. A guerrilla who is fighting the government of Uganda, because the target of a guerrilla is physical. He may attack the railway to disrupt any movement of troops, even uproot the railway, bomb it, to disrupt the deployment of troops to be able to fight him. That cripples the government's military ability to prosecute the war against the guerrilla. The terrorist may attack the same railway for an entirely different reason. I attack the railway. When I attack it, it will cause government to go into the community where the railway is going through, thinking these people ethnically are hostile to us. They're either Bakonjo or Batoro, and then the government begins killing them, it kills them, then they come on our side. So the same act can have different intentions, and those intentions define what is a terrorist and what is a guerrilla.
I remember...
Hold on a second, Emmanuel. A guerrilla does not employ indiscriminate violence. And you can read the history of NRA. Their violence is targeted to degrade the enemy, and it's targeted now. For a terrorist, the people who kills, he's indifferent to whether Kariegera dies or not. This is a form of communication to elicit a different reaction. So when the guy goes into a market and blows himself up, it isn't that he hates Kasaija here, or hates Kabuleta, or hates you, Emma or Kariegera. No. It is simply that he is taking action to provoke a different type of reaction. So Lukwago and Kabuleta mistake the...
Okay, let me ask you a simple question. Do you know any guerrillas right now in the world? I'll tell you this. What has changed is terminology. Because the last guerrillas I heard of were Tamil Tiger in Sri Lanka. Now, all people who are fighting guerrillas are called terrorists. The terminology changed. The terminology changed. And that's just because what
says
Major General
American
Funza was doing here in Kampala, disrupting the city. And you cannot fight a guerrilla warfare where people are comfortable going around their business. You have to cause some disruption.
I think to tell the middle position is, I'll use two examples. We had the Black Bomber Squad under the man from your backyard.
Yes, under
Chalgonza Matai.
And
you know, they had all this kind of, weird ideas.
And they blew up innocent people.
Please,
Wait,
guys.
I also read in the book, Andrew, I also read in the Pecos's book where Museveni comes in and says, well, when they plan to bomb the water tank in Muyezi, I think that's not a very good idea. So there's extremely a very thin line. Because they also said at one time they thought of using petrol stations.
I have to be the same, the purposes will be different. Kabuleta, remember that throughout the 60s and 70s, there were terrorist organizations and there were guerrilla groups. For political purposes, someone can label a guerrilla movement, like the ANC was labeled in was by the Americans a terrorist organization. That is for political purposes. But in terms of an academic like him here, there are books, academic papers that have been written about terrorism. There is a clear difference between the NRA, the EPLA, the RPF, and all these other groups from, let's say, at that time, there was, what was it, the Black September? The guys, they were different. They were terrorist organizations, and they were
what's the difference?
The Chinese Communist Party, when it was fighting against Mao, Mao was fighting Chiang Kai-shek. It was not a terrorist organization. It was a guerrilla movement. The Vietnamese,
which went and did such a great job bringing order into Somalia, and has tried to do something like that in South Sudan and other places, maybe even like Burundi, where it was not stated, but where we know when Nkurunziza was taken off, UPDF were there and they took off the people who had staged the coup and got him back there. Now, an army as strong as that, and that has done all these things out of the country, why 25 years of fighting a small outfit called ADF? Don't you think that it lends credence to the theory that maybe ADF is supposed to be like a side chick? Don't come into Kampala, you stay that side. We need you to go into Congo to get more timber and gold. But if they really wanted them out, I think they could put them out, because they have showed that elsewhere.
You forget that the government of, rather, the ADF is not located in Uganda, it's located in Congo. And the only way, therefore, and Museveni believes that in fact Uganda should protect her borders. It should not get dragged into Congo. And he has only gone to Congo now on the invitation of the government of Congo. So ADF is not present in Uganda, and when it is present in Uganda, it has been present as a terrorist organization.
Let's carry this forward. Professor, we're not only having problems within the Congo and Uganda, but let's look at the eastern horn of Africa, which has quite a lot of violence and volatility. Ethiopia, currently, Tigray, we're having a crisis. Sudan, we have a crisis. There was a coup the other day against the civilian government. South Sudan remains a sick man, just like DR Congo. Kenya soon is going to an election with its challenges, ethno-political cleavages. Rwanda and Uganda continue to have this border dispute. Not so many, in the 90s, I think it was the US President Bill Clinton who saw a
We
new
don't
donor.
have a border dispute.
I was about to say that. We have a closed border, not a border dispute.
Well, there is a border. There is a border dispute.
Whatever you
There's
want
also
to
a border dispute.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
Yeah, let's go on. Yeah, whatever you want to call it. There was like a new dawn of hope when Bill Clinton said Museveni, Meles Zenawi, and Paul Kagame were the new breed of leaders, and we thought they would usher in, an era of peace. What's exactly happening?
What happened? You should ask them what happened. That statement was made in 1998. And the idea was that these are people who were...
1997.
97, 98. These are people who are different from the old guard, Mobutu kind of the Edamas and all the others. But I think along the way, things happen. And we saw this, of course, in 1999, 2000, when we went to war with Rwanda and Kisangani. And 1998, the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea over Badme. So things happen, but presumably also the characterization itself could have gone onto these people's heads, and they thought that they were actually a new breed, when actually they turned out to be the old breed. And I think time has proven that actually these are not different from
Which is exactly why some of us will start off doubting official versions of history.
So my point here is that
But Kasaija, you are a scholar, are you not? Tell me a rebel movement that supported another to capture power in a neighboring country, rather an armed struggle government. These governments has go to the bush, fight a protracted war, capture power. Then they sponsor another one to go and capture power in a neighboring area. They have not gone to war. The Russians, the Communist Party of Russia, supported the Chinese Communist Party to capture power in China. Russia and China went to war in 1962. The Chinese supported the Vietnamese during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, sure.
China and Vietnam went to war. The Vietnamese supported the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia to capture power there. Vietnam and Cambodia went to war. The Eritreans supported the Ethiopians to capture power in Addis Ababa. The two went to war. Uganda supported Rwanda to capture power. The two went to war. Rwanda supported the Kabuleta to capture power. The two went to war. There is something in the structure of armed struggle governments when they support a neighbor to capture power. There's something inherent in that dynamic that finally leads them to confrontation. And that universality that I have mentioned about these groups is not a coincidence. Across geographic space and across historic time, the continuity has been that they tend to
So what did the explanation?
For me, the point is, therefore, that to say their behavior could have actually been predicted or at least confirmed a historical pattern. So Clinton's statement that the new group of a new breed of African leaders based on their guerrilla background, certainly they were a new breed in the sense of the source of their power, but they tended to reflect long-term continuities across geographic space and historic time for these specific revolutionary movements.
Professor, just as we wind this up, please. Continue, you're still speaking.
So no, my point here was that along the way, things happened, and on all the countries that were described as such by Madeleine Albright and Clinton have ended up the way they have ended. Of course, we have the issues of Ethiopia and Eritrea, the issues of Uganda and Rwanda, issues of Rwanda and the DRC. Although we have seen some improvements along the way, you know, the coming to power Tshisekedi, the rapprochement that we see between Uganda and DRC. But the old issues still are there. The M23, I talked to the M23 group. I did research a couple of years back for Minister of Foreign Affairs. And my entry point was just basically to see what they call the Nairobi Accords. If you remember, there was when M23 was thrown out of the DRC, there were talks in Munyonyo, and those talks resulted into two pieces of agreement. Well, it's not an agreement. That's why the Congo government didn't want to call it an agreement. So there were commitments. And my point was to look for what has happened to those commitments, which were signed in Nairobi. And I had to talk to M23 group. I remember meeting Bisimwa and telling me that I should address him as president. And I was laughing. He said, "President of what?" And he said, "I'm president of M23. So these groups are there. And I think in the long run, part I think of the solution will be integration. I'm a student of integration, and I'm one of those people who have been arguing that actually this region is better off when we're integrated. Unfortunately, inherently there are problems with integration itself, and we have seen this. Whether it is the standard gauge railway, whether it is the oil pipeline and the politics that go around that. How Kenya became very angry with us because we had cut a deal with Tanzania over the pipeline when we had promised them that we were going to go to Lamu. So integration will resolve some of these issues, but unfortunately, it's not happened.
Thank you very much, Professor. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of this program. We've been discussing the issue of regional security and the idea of threats. We had a very interesting panel. Timothy Kaliagera, Joseph Kabuleta, Andrew Mwenda, Professor Philip Kasaija, being your host, Emmanuel Mutaiziwa. Have a pleasant evening.